The road stretched endlessly ahead, a ribbon of asphalt glistening under the pale glow of streetlights. For Rachel Morgan, every mile felt like another reminder of how much weight she carried alone. The steering wheel vibrated softly beneath her tired hands, and in the back seat, her 8-year-old son, Ethan, slept with his head tilted against the window, his small frame bundled in a faded hoodie that was just a little too small. Rachel's life wasn't supposed to look like this. Not long ago she had imagined a home with 2 incomes, laughter filling the living room, and someone to share the burden of raising a child. But her husband had walked out 2 years ago, leaving her with overdue bills, a mountain of responsibility, and a son who sometimes asked questions she couldn't bring herself to answer. Tonight, she was driving back from a late shift at the diner, her hair still smelling faintly of grease and coffee, her uniform crumpled from hours of constant motion. The paycheck she'd tucked into her purse felt heavier than usual. Not because of the amount, which was pitiful, but because of what it represented. She had worked overtime all week to cover Ethan's school supplies and maybe, just maybe, a second-hand tablet he'd been begging for so he could be like the other kids. The gas light on her dashboard flickered ominously. Rachel sighed, glancing at the fuel gauge, barely enough to get home. She hadn't planned on stopping, not at this hour, but life rarely cared about her plans. She tightened her grip on the wheel and scanned the signs until the neon glow of a gas station appeared in the distance. Of course. She muttered under her breath, as though fate were laughing at her. The place looked deserted, except for the hum of fluorescent lights and the lonely pump island under its buzzing canopy. She turned into the lot, tires crunching over scattered gravel, and pulled up to a pump. Rachel shut off the engine, the sudden silence filling the car like a weight pressing down on her. For a moment, she just sat there, listening to Ethan's soft breathing. She didn't want to wake him. He had school in the morning, and she knew the days were harder on him when he didn't sleep enough. Gathering her purse, she stepped out into the cool night air. The wind carried the faint smell of gasoline mixed with something metallic and sore, and the empty lot felt unnervingly exposed. She glanced around. The convenience store attached to the station was lit up, but she couldn't see anyone inside. Rachel swiped her card at the pump, the machine beeping with an indifference that mirrored her exhaustion. As the numbers clicked upward, she rubbed her arms against the chill, her eyes scanning the shadows at the edges of the lot. Maybe it was paranoia, or maybe it was the kind of instinct that single mothers learn to trust. Either way, her pulse quickened. A memory surfaced, the advice her mother used to give: always trust your gut, Rachel. If something feels wrong, it probably is. But she had no choice. She needed the gas, she needed to get home. The nozzle clicked, and she returned it to the pump, forcing herself to breathe evenly. She had just screwed the cap back on when she heard it, laughter, low, sharp, and cutting through the night like a knife. Her body stiffened. From the far side of the lot, 3 men emerged from the shadows. Leather jackets, cigarettes glowing in the dark, swagger in every step. Their voices carried easily, laced with mockery and something far more dangerous. Rachel froze. Her first instinct was to get back into the car, but they were already watching her. Already walking closer. She tried not to panic. Maybe they were just passing by. Maybe they weren't interested in her at all. But her gut told her otherwise. She reached for her car door, her fingers trembling as she pulled the handle. "Hey there, sweetheart," one of the men called out, his voice thick with arrogance. "What's a pretty thing like you doing out here all alone?" Rachel's heart hammered. She didn't answer. Didn't look at him. She slid into the driver's seat and locked the door with a decisive click. But her silence only seemed to amuse them. Another voice chimed in. "Don't be rude, darlin'. We're just trying to be friendly." They spread out as they approached, forming a loose semicircle around her car. One of them flicked his cigarette onto the pavement, the ember sparking as it died. Rachel's breathing grew shallow. Ethan stirred in the back seat, murmuring something in his sleep, and Rachel's stomach twisted into knots. She couldn't let these men see her fear. She couldn't let them realize she was vulnerable. But deep down, she knew they already had. Her phone was in her purse, but her shaking hands fumbled with the zipper. She wanted to call the police, but even if she did, how long would it take them to arrive? Out here, on this lonely stretch of road, minutes could feel like lifetimes. The men were closer now, their faces illuminated under the harsh light of the canopy. Tattoos snaked across their arms and necks, and their grins carried a cruel edge. Rachel swallowed hard, her mind racing. Stay calm. Protect Ethan. Do not show weakness. She had no idea what was about to happen, but she did know one thing: this night would not pass quietly. The air grew heavy, as though the night itself leaned in to listen. Rachel sat frozen behind the wheel, her hands clutching the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles blanched. Every nerve in her body screamed at her to flee, but the 3 men standing around her car made it clear she wasn't going anywhere fast. One of them leaned down, tapping the glass with a grimy finger. "Come on, sweetheart. Don't hide behind the glass. We just want to talk." Rachel's eyes flicked toward the back seat. Ethan had shifted in his sleep, his small hand clutching the strap of his seatbelt like a lifeline. The sight of him both strengthened and terrified her. She couldn't let these men know she wasn't alone, couldn't let them sense her child's presence. The man rapped his knuckles against the window again, harder this time. You deaf? Or just rude? Rachel forced herself to breathe slowly, calculating. She could honk the horn, draw attention. But the gas station seemed utterly deserted. No other cars pulled in, no clerk peered out from the convenience store window. She was alone. She reached for her purse again, pretending to rummage, when her fingers brushed the cool edge of her phone. Relief surged, until the man suddenly yanked on the door handle. The locked door held, but Rachel jumped, her heart leaping into her throat. Come on now, he said with a smirk, his breath fogging the glass. You think that little lock's gonna keep you safe? Another man circled behind her car, dragging his fingers across the trunk, slow and deliberate. The sound was like nails on a chalkboard, scraping away at her courage. Rachel's pulse pounded in her ears. She knew she couldn't show weakness. She forced herself to roll down the window just an inch, just enough to project a calm she didn't feel. Please, she said, her voice steady though her stomach churned. I just want to leave. That's all. The first man's grin widened. We can help you with that. But it's gonna cost you. The way he said it made her blood run cold. Rachel's thumb hovered over her phone screen, desperate to dial 911. But then Ethan stirred again, letting out a small, drowsy groan. The sound was faint, but the men caught it. What was that? One of them asked, cocking his head. He leaned down, peering through the glass into the back seat. His grin shifted into something darker. Well, you got company, huh? Rachel's heart plummeted. She tried to shield Ethan from view with her arm, but it was too late. The second man snickered. Cute kid. Shame if anything happened to him. Panic clawed at her chest. She wanted to scream, to fight, to do anything, but she felt cornered. Every exit was blocked by leather-clad bodies that reeked of beer and smoke. Please, Rachel whispered, her voice cracking. Don't, he's just a child. The men exchanged looks, amused by her desperation. The first one leaned closer, his eyes narrowing. Then you better be real cooperative, mama. Rachel's thoughts raced. She could slam the car into reverse, but one of them stood directly behind her bumper. She could lay on the horn, but what if no one came? For the first time in years she prayed, not with polished words or rehearsed lines, but with raw, desperate thoughts. God, please. Someone, anyone, help us. And then a sound cut through the night, low at first like a distant growl, then louder, deeper, the unmistakable rumble of motorcycle engines. The thugs froze, their smirks faltering as the sound grew nearer. Rachel's head snapped toward the road, her chest tightening with hope and dread all at once. The engines roared closer, not just one but many, the kind of thunder that shook the ground beneath her tires. Headlights appeared, slicing through the darkness, a dozen beams glinting off chrome and steel. The rumble swelled until it was no longer background noise but a presence, a force. The men shifted uneasily, glancing at each other. Their swagger dimmed, replaced with wariness. Rachel's pulse quickened. Whoever was coming, it was enough to rattle the thugs. The first motorcycle turned into the station, followed by another and another. Big machines, heavy and loud. Their riders clad in leather vests and boots that looked built for the road. They didn't look like saviors, they looked like trouble. But trouble for whom? The bikers rolled in like a tide, circling slowly until their headlights bathed the lot in harsh white beams. The thugs squinted against the glare, their earlier bravado crumbling under the weight of sheer numbers. Rachel sat frozen, her breath caught in her throat. She didn't know who these bikers were or what they wanted. All she knew was that, for the first time that night, the power had shifted. The leader cut his engine first, the others following in unison. The silence that followed was even heavier than the roar that preceded it. The man swung off his bike with practiced ease. He was broad-shouldered, his beard streaked with gray, his eyes sharp under the brim of a worn cap. His leather vest bore patches Rachel couldn't read in the dim light, but one stood out clearly across the back, a soaring eagle clutching a shield. He took a slow step forward, his boots echoing against the pavement. Then another. The thug stiffened. Problem here, boys. The biker's voice was low, steady, and carried the kind of authority that didn't need to be shouted. The three men exchanged nervous glances. For the first time they hesitated. Rachel's heart thudded, her eyes darting between the thugs and the bikers. She didn't know what would happen next, but she felt it. Something had changed. The darkness no longer felt like hers to fight alone. The leader of the bikers stood squarely in the center of the gas station lot, his boots planted firm, shoulders broad beneath the black leather vest. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. His presence was enough to make the night feel heavier. Rachel could feel the tension vibrating in the air, as if even the buzzing lights above had gone quiet to listen. The thug who'd been rapping on her window straightened up, forcing a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Ain't no problem here," he said, his voice dripping with forced nonchalance. "Just having a friendly chat with the lady." The biker tilted his head, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Funny. Didn't sound friendly from where we were." Behind him, the rest of the bikers dismounted, forming a loose semicircle that mirrored the one the thugs had created around Rachel's car. But unlike the thugs, the bikers moved with a calm confidence, no showboating, no wasted gestures, just steady, deliberate steps that said, "We've seen worse. We know what we're doing." Rachel's pulse throbbed in her ears. She wasn't sure if she should feel safer or even more afraid. Bikers had a reputation, everyone knew that. But as she glanced at the way they positioned themselves, protective, deliberate, something in her gut whispered they weren't here to make things worse. The thug nearest her sneered, trying to puff up his chest. "Look, old man, this ain't your business. Why don't you and your boys keep riding and mind your own?" The biker leader didn't flinch. He stepped closer just enough to close the gap. His voice was calm, almost conversational. "See, that's where you're wrong. A woman and her kid alone at night. That makes it our business." Rachel's breath caught. They know about Ethan. She twisted in her seat, glancing at her son. He was still asleep, oblivious to the storm raging outside. Relief and dread collided in her chest. Relief that someone was standing up for them, dread that the danger had escalated. The second thug spat on the ground, his bravado shaky but stubborn. "You think just 'cause you roll in with your biker gang, you can tell us what to do?" The leader didn't blink. "It's not about telling. It's about stopping you from doing something you'll regret." The air grew denser, charged with the kind of energy that precedes a storm. One of the bikers, a tall man with tattoos winding down both arms, spoke up for the first time. His tone was low, almost lazy, but his words were sharp. "Best thing you can do right now is walk away. 'Cause if you don't, you'll find out real quick. There's more of us than you, and we don't play games." The thugs hesitated. They weren't cowards, but they weren't stupid either. 3 men against nearly a dozen bikers was bad math, and even they knew it. Still, pride made them linger, sneers plastered on their faces like masks. Rachel pressed her forehead against the steering wheel, whispering silently, "Please go. Just go." But instead of backing down, the first thug took a step toward the biker leader, his hand twitching near his jacket pocket. "You don't scare me." The leader didn't move, but the air around him shifted. His fellow riders closed ranks ever so slightly, their silent unity more intimidating than raised fists could ever be. "Maybe I don't," the leader said evenly. "But let me ask you something. That woman, that kid, you really want to be the kind of man who threatens them? That's what you want written on your face when people remember you?" For the first time, the thug faltered. His mouth opened, but no words came. Rachel blinked, stunned. She hadn't expected reason. She hadn't expected this stranger to appeal to something human inside these men. But the spell broke as the second thug barked out a laugh, shaking his head. "Man, you bikers think you're some kind of heroes. This ain't a movie." The tattooed biker stepped forward then, the heavy chain on his belt glinting under the fluorescent light. His eyes were steel. "You're right. It ain't a movie. Which means if you lay a hand on that woman or her boy, no director's yelling cut. You'll deal with us. For real." The silence that followed was deafening. Rachel could feel her heartbeat in her throat, her palms slick with sweat. Every fiber of her being wanted this to end before fists, or worse, started flying. But then unexpectedly Ethan stirred again. This time he woke. His small voice piped up from the back seat, groggy but curious. "Mom, what's going on?" Rachel whipped around, her chest tightening. "It's okay, baby. Go back to sleep." But it was too late. His voice had cut through the tension like a crack in glass. The bikers glanced toward the car, their expressions softening slightly. The thugs, however, latched onto it like sharks smelling blood. The first thug smirked again, trying to salvage his bravado. "Cute kid. Shame if he grew up without his mom." Rachel's stomach dropped. That was it. That was the line too far. The biker leader's jaw tightened, his eyes hard as flint. He took one final step forward, close enough now that Rachel could see the scuff marks on his boots through the windshield. "Last chance," he said, his voice low, deadly calm. "Walk away, right now. Or you won't walk away at all." The words hung in the air, heavy and unshakable. The thugs looked at one another. Their bravado flickered, replaced by unease. They could feel it now. The weight of being outnumbered, outmatched, and outclassed. For a long, breathless moment, no one moved. And then, with a muttered curse, the first thug spat to the side and backed away. The others followed, though their eyes still burned with resentment. "Whatever, man," one of them grumbled. "Ain't worth it." Rachel's knees buckled with relief, even though she was still seated. She wanted to cry, to thank the bikers, to scream. All at once. But it wasn't over. Because as the thugs retreated into the shadows, one of them turned back, pointing a finger at the bikers. "This ain't done. You'll regret messin' with us." The leader didn't flinch. "Get in line." The thugs disappeared into the night, their footsteps fading until all that was left was the steady hum of the gas station lights. Rachel finally exhaled, the breath shuddering out of her like she'd been holding it for hours. The bikers didn't cheer, they didn't boast. They simply stood their ground, silent sentinels in the night. The leader turned toward her car, his expression softening just enough to reveal the man behind the leather. "You okay, ma'am?" he asked. Rachel opened her mouth, but her voice broke before the words came. She nodded instead, tears brimming in her eyes. Ethan's small face appeared beside her, wide-eyed and scared. Mom, who are they? Rachel swallowed hard, glancing at the strangers who had just changed everything. I don't know, baby, she whispered. But I think they just saved us. Rachel sat frozen in the driver's seat, her hands still gripping the wheel even though the car wasn't moving. Her chest rose and fell in sharp, uneven breaths, and the adrenaline rushing through her veins made it feel as if her whole body were trembling from the inside out. She had been afraid before. Afraid of unpaid bills, of raising Ethan without help, of the loneliness that crept into her bed at night. But this fear, this was primal. Raw. The kind that seizes your lungs and whispers you might not make it out alive. Ethan leaned forward from the back seat, his wide eyes darting between her and the strangers outside. His voice cracked with worry. Mom, are we in trouble? Rachel turned to him quickly, forcing a shaky smile she didn't feel. No, sweetheart. We're okay now. She brushed a strand of hair from his forehead, her fingers trembling as they lingered against his soft skin. We're okay because of them, she thought, her eyes flicking back to the men who had stood between her son and danger. The biker leader was still watching her, his posture steady, his presence commanding yet strangely calm. His eyes, sharp beneath the shadow of his cap, softened just slightly when they met hers. Take your time, he said gently, as though he could see the panic coursing through her. You're safe. Safe. The word felt foreign in her mouth. Rachel lowered her forehead to the steering wheel, her tears finally spilling free. They were hot and unrelenting, but she didn't care anymore if anyone saw. She had been holding it together for so long, through long shifts, late bills, Ethan's questions about his absent father, that she hadn't allowed herself to break. But tonight, the damn crack. Her shoulders shook with silent sobs, every drop a mixture of relief, fear and exhaustion. She covered her face with her hands, ashamed but unable to stop. From outside she heard the crunch of boots against pavement. Her head shot up alarmed, until she saw it was one of the bikers approaching slowly. Not the leader, but a tall, broad man with kind eyes. He didn't come too close. He stopped a few feet from her car and crouched slightly, leveling himself with her window. You don't gotta cry, Mom, he said in a voice that carried surprising warmth. Ain't no shame in it. We've all been scared before. Rachel swallowed, her throat tight. She cracked the window an inch. I didn't know what they were going to do. The biker nodded. That's why we're here. Ethan tugged at her sleeve. Mom, who are they? Rachel hesitated, looking into her son's frightened eyes. They're people who helped us, baby. Her voice wavered, but she meant every word. The leader finally stepped closer, his boots steady against the cracked pavement. He looked at Ethan, then back at Rachel. We're not here to scare you. We just don't like bullies. That's all. Rachel studied him carefully. He looked tough, grizzled beard, leather vest, hands that seemed built more for fists than comfort. But there was something in his tone, in the steady calm of his gaze, that felt different from the men who had just threatened her. Something she couldn't quite name. Still, the fear clung to her like smoke. What if they come back? Rachel's voice cracked as she asked the question, her chest tightening. What if they follow us? They saw Ethan. Her hand tightened on her son's arm as if holding him closer could make him safer. The leader didn't hesitate. Then they'll answer to us. It was said so simply, so matter-of-factly, that Rachel blinked. Ethan perked up, curiosity shining through his fear. Like superheroes? That made the bikers chuckle, low and rough but not unkind. One of them, shorter, stockier, with a patch over his left eye, grinned. Not exactly, kid. We ain't got capes. But we got stealin' brothers. Sometimes that's enough. Rachel managed the faintest smile, though her lips trembled. She didn't know these men. Didn't know their names, their lives, or what drew them to this lonely gas station in the middle of the night. But they had shown up when she needed it most. And that mattered. Still, her fear wouldn't fully let go. She turned the key in the ignition, the engine rumbling to life. I should get him home, she said quietly. The leader nodded once, his expression unreadable. We'll follow you. Rachel blinked. Follow me. He tilted his head, to make sure you get there safe. Part of her bristled at the idea, strangers on bikes trailing her through the night. But another part of her, the part that had tasted how close danger had come, exhaled with relief. Maybe tonight, safety didn't mean being alone. Ethan leaned against the window, watching the bikers with wide-eyed wonder. Mom, can they really come with us? Rachel hesitated, her fingers tightening on the wheel. If they want to. The leader gave a small nod, then turned back to his men. A few gestures, a few murmured words, and the group began to mount their bikes again. Engines roared to life, their thunder vibrating through the ground. Rachel pulled out of the station slowly, her headlights cutting across the empty highway. In her rearview mirror, a line of motorcycles followed. An escort of chrome and leather, shadows against the moonlit road. For the first time in a long time, Rachel didn't feel quite so alone. But her fear still whispered in the corners of her mind, reminding her that threats didn't vanish overnight. And as she drove, Ethan yawning softly in the back seat, she realized this night was far from over. Because sometimes, even when danger passed, the memory of it clung just as tightly. And sometimes, strangers who looked like wolves turned out to be the only ones standing between you and the dark. The highway stretched long and lonely, a black ribbon under the pale wash of the moon. Rachel's headlights cut a narrow path forward, while behind her the glow of motorcycle beams shimmered like a constellation in motion. The steady rumble of engines followed her like thunder, low and constant, wrapping around her small sedan like a protective wall. Ethan twisted in his seat, his eyes wide with wonder. "Mom," he whispered, "they're still there." Rachel glanced at the rearview mirror. He was right. A dozen bikers rode in perfect formation, their chrome glinting faintly in the dark. They weren't crowding her, but they weren't letting her drift out of their orbit either. It was deliberate, like soldiers guarding a caravan. She gripped the wheel tighter. The danger back at the gas station was gone, but her nerves hadn't settled. Every time she blinked, she saw the leering grins of those thugs, heard their voices dripping with malice. Her stomach clenched at the memory of one of them pointing at Ethan. And yet the biker's presence behind her made it easier to breathe. She rolled down her window an inch. The night air rushed in, carrying with it the growl of engines. It wasn't a sound she would have ever considered comforting before. But tonight it felt like the very thing tethering her to safety. Ethan pressed his nose to the glass. "Do you think they're really gonna follow us all the way home?" Rachel hesitated. I don't know, sweetheart." In truth, she wasn't sure how she felt about that. Gratitude, yes, but also unease. These men had saved her, but they were still strangers. Strangers with heavy boots, leather jackets, and a presence that intimidated even the worst kind of bullies. She reminded herself appearances don't always tell the story. She had judged them once already tonight, and if she had been wrong then maybe she was wrong now too. A new sound pulled her from her thoughts, a single bike breaking formation. In the mirror she saw one rider pull up alongside her car. Rachel tensed, her foot easing off the gas. The rider matched her speed, the engine's roar steady but not aggressive. In the glow of her headlights, she recognized him, the leader. The man with the gray streaked beard and eyes that cut like steel. He turned his head just enough to meet her gaze through the glass. Then, with a small nod, he lifted one hand from the handlebars and motioned ahead as if to say, "Keep going, you're not alone." Rachel's throat tightened. She nodded back, her voice catching when she whispered, "Thank you." The biker couldn't hear her, but maybe he didn't need to. He gave one more nod before pulling back into formation. Ethan grinned in the back seat. "Mom, did you see that? He talked to you without even talking." Rachel managed a shaky laugh. "Yeah, I guess he did." For several miles, silence filled the car, broken only by the hum of the tires and the steady chorus of engines behind them. Slowly her pulse steadied, her hands relaxing on the wheel, but peace was fragile. Up ahead a pair of headlights appeared in the opposite lane. As the vehicle drew closer, Rachel recognized the make and color, and her blood ran cold. It was the same beat-up truck she'd glimpsed at the gas station earlier, parked at the far end of the lot. The one the thugs had likely arrived in. Her heart stuttered. No, not again. The truck barreled past in the opposite direction, but she swore she saw faces peering from the cab, eyes narrowing as they caught sight of her little convoy. "Mom?" Ethan's voice was small. "Was that them?" Rachel forced calm into her voice. "I don't know, baby, maybe." But the bikers knew. She could tell by the way their formation tightened, the way one of the riders dropped back farther behind her car as if guarding against the possibility of being followed. Her chest squeezed. Fear prickled the edges of her relief. What if they circle back? What if this isn't over? The convoy pressed on. Town was still 10 miles away, a long stretch of darkness between them and safety. Rachel cleared her throat, her voice barely audible over the engines. "Why are they doing this?" Ethan tilted his head. "'Cause they're the good guys." Rachel bit her lip, staring at the line of headlights in her mirror. Were they? They certainly looked like saviors tonight. But what kind of men live this life? Why did they care about her? A stranger they'd never met. The questions gnawed at her, but alongside them was something else she hadn't felt in a long time: trust. Fragile, hesitant, but real. She sighed, keeping her eyes on the road. For now maybe it was enough to simply accept the help she hadn't asked for but desperately needed. And then, almost like an answer, another sound split the night. Distant at first, but growing engines. Not behind her this time, but ahead. Rachel stiffened. Her headlights caught another group of motorcycles cresting the hill. More riders, their chrome catching moonlight. Her grip on the wheel tightened. Oh God, are there more of them? Ethan pressed his face to the glass, excitement flickering across his features. "Mom! They're like meeting each other." Rachel's stomach twisted. Were these friends of the bikers behind her? Or enemies? The two groups drew closer, the road narrowing as the distance collapsed. Rachel slowed instinctively, her breath trapped in her chest. The first of the oncoming riders raised his hand high in a gesture, a wave. And then, as the two groups passed each other, the bikers behind her raised their hands in return, two-finger salutes flashing in the night. Not rivals, brothers. Rachel exhaled, the tension in her chest easing. Ethan grinned. "See, they're all on the same team." Rachel allowed herself the faintest smile. Maybe he was right. Maybe tonight, the universe had given her allies she never would have expected. The miles slipped by, the town lights finally glowing faint on the horizon. Relief surged through her veins. They were almost home. Almost safe. But Rachel knew this wasn't just about getting home. Something deeper was unfolding. Something about these men, about the way they'd appeared exactly when she needed them most, about the way they carried themselves like more than just rough bikers. Her fear was still there. But for the first time in a long while it wasn't the only thing she felt. Because engines in the distance no longer meant danger. They meant hope. The first glimpse of Main Street came like a promise. Soft hellos of yellow light from diners, convenience stores, and the sleepy corners of Rachel's small town. Relief pooled in her chest. She had made it. Almost. But fate wasn't finished with her yet. She eased onto the two-lane road that cut toward her neighborhood, the bikers still a steel-clad shield behind her. That's when Ethan's small gasp sliced through the air. "Mom, the truck." Rachel's head snapped to the side. Her stomach dropped. Parked crooked across the entrance of a lot just ahead sat the same battered pickup. The thugs were leaning against it, cans in hand. Shadows draped across their sneering faces. Her heart kicked hard. They had doubled back. The lead thug, the one with the tattoo curling up his neck, spotted her car first. His grin widened in cruel recognition. He crushed his can, letting it clatter to the pavement, then stepped out into the road. Rachel's instinct screamed at her to swerve, to turn around. But before she could react, the roar of engines behind her crescendoed like a storm. The bikers surged forward, splitting into two lines that flanked her car like wings. Their headlights blasted across the thugs, beams so bright the men flinched and shielded their eyes. Ethan gripped his seatbelt with both hands. "Mom, they're protecting us." Rachel's pulse thundered in her ears. She slowed, her sedan boxed in safely by the bikers, who rolled forward with a unity that felt less like chance and more like destiny. The thug in the road spat onto the pavement and spread his arms wide, taunting. "What's this? Little lady brought an army." Rachel could hear her heartbeat in her throat. She wanted to disappear, to shield Ethan from this madness. But the bikers weren't retreating. The leader, the gray-bearded rider, rolled his bike to the front of the pack. He killed his engine. The sudden silence was deafening. Slowly, he swung one heavy boot to the ground and stood, towering under the street lamp's glow. His presence was thunder without sound. Rachel could see the tension in the thugs' postures. For all their earlier bravado, they hadn't expected this. The leader's voice was low, steady, but it cut the night like a blade. "You picked the wrong family to mess with tonight." The thug barked out a laugh, though it rang hollow. "Family? What? You think you're knights in shining leather?" One by one, the other bikers shut down their engines. The road filled with silence, save for the creak of leather and the faint clicking of cooling metal. Rachel's breath caught as more riders dismounted, boots striking asphalt in unison. They didn't posture. They didn't shout. They simply stood, shoulder to shoulder, in front of her car, a wall of steel and flesh between her and danger. Ethan whispered, off-flooding his voice, "It's like a movie." The thug with the neck tattoos smirk faltered. He glanced at his crew, clearly reassessing. But pride was a cruel master. "Don't know who you think you are?" he spat. "But this isn't your business." The leader took a single step forward. His eyes burned like coals. "It became my business the second you put a woman and her kid in fear for their lives." The thug scoffed, trying to muster bravado, but his fingers twitched nervously at his sides. Big talk for a biker gang. The leader tilted his head, voice steady. "Not a gang. A brotherhood." Something in the way he said it sent a shiver down Rachel's spine. She realized this wasn't just posturing. These men lived by a code. The silence stretched. Tension coiled tight as a wire, seconds stretching like hours. Then another sound shattered it, the squeal of tires. From the corner of her vision, Rachel saw another vehicle turn onto the road fast, too fast. Another pickup, younger, louder. Its headlights sliced through the dark, barreling toward the standoff. Her hands flew to her mouth. "Oh God, there's more of them." The bikers didn't flinch. They tightened formation, several stepping subtly closer to Rachel's car as though bracing for impact. The second truck screeched to a halt a few yards away. Its doors slammed open, spilling out two more men, younger but no less mean, their laughter sharp and ugly. Ethan whimpered. Rachel reached back blindly, squeezing his hand. "It's okay, baby, we're okay." But inside she didn't believe it. The street now held a brewing war, a handful of thugs, emboldened by reinforcements, and a wall of bikers standing firm. The leader of the bikers squared his shoulders. "You boys really want to find out how this ends?" One of the newcomers sneered. "Yeah, and who's gonna stop us? You." Then, almost casually, he reached into his jacket. Rachel's heart leapt into her throat, until he pulled out not a weapon, but something else entirely. A chain. Thick, heavy, gleaming faintly in the streetlight. He let it dangle from his fist, the links clinking like a warning bell. The other bikers followed suit, not with guns or knives but with the tools of their world. Chains. Tire irons. A crowbar or two. Not flashy, not threatening for the sake of it, but enough to send a message. The thugs wavered. Their false confidence flickered in the face of a brotherhood ready to fight. Rachel's chest tightened. She hated violence, feared it, but what she saw wasn't senseless aggression, it was protection. A shield, not a sword. The thug leader spat again, eyes darting between the bikers. He muttered something under his breath to his crew. One of them shifted uneasily. Man, this ain't worth it. Another nodded, retreat already creeping into his posture. And just like that, the balance shifted. The thugs' numbers weren't enough to outweigh what they faced, men who didn't back down, who had shown up not for themselves but for someone else. The leader of the bikers lifted his chin, his voice steady, final. Last chance. Walk away. Silence. Then slowly, grudgingly, the thug leader stepped back. His sneer was still painted on his face, but his eyes had lost their fire. He jerked his chin toward the trucks. See, mun. This ain't over. But even as they piled into their vehicles, Rachel knew it was. Not tonight, not with the bikers standing here. The trucks revved and peeled away, taillights shrinking into the distance. For a long moment the street was silent again. The bikers didn't cheer, didn't taunt, they simply watched until the danger was gone. Then, as if on cue, the leader turned, his gaze meeting Rachel's through the windshield. His expression softened just slightly, enough to send a wave of relief crashing over her. She realized she was trembling. Ethan still clutched her hand, his small body vibrating with adrenaline. The leader walked slowly toward her car. Rachel's instinct was to lock the doors, but she didn't. Not this time. He stopped by her window, leaning just enough to speak through the glass. His voice was calm, steady. You're safe now. Rachel's throat worked, but no words came. She could only nod, her eyes burning with tears she hadn't realized she'd been holding back. Ethan piped up from the back seat, his voice brimming with awe. You guys are like superheroes. For the first time, Rachel thought she saw the faintest flicker of a smile beneath the man's beard. Not heroes, kid, just men who look out for their own. And in that moment, Rachel understood. They had made her their own. The night had gone strangely quiet. After the thugs' trucks vanished down the road, the only sound left was the soft ticking of Rachel's car engine, and the occasional shuffle of boots as the bikers regrouped. Rachel sat frozen in the driver's seat, hands still gripping the wheel. The storm of adrenaline was slowly ebbing, leaving her body trembling like a leaf in a strong wind. In the back seat, Ethan couldn't sit still. His small hands pressed against the window, eyes shining with awe. Mom, did you see them? They didn't even fight, they just scared them away. Rachel swallowed, forcing air into her lungs. Yeah, honey, I saw. But inside, her thoughts were tangled. These men, these strangers, had placed themselves between her and danger without hesitation. And yet, every warning bell society had ever drilled into her about leather jackets, tattoos, and motorcycles rang loud in her mind. Who were they? Why had they cared enough to help her? As if reading her thoughts, the gray-bearded leader rapped gently on her window. His knuckles were scarred, his hand heavy, but the gesture was patient, almost polite. Rachel jumped, then rolled the window down halfway. You should pull over up ahead, he said, his voice low and steady. Let the kid stretch his legs, road's clear now. Rachel hesitated, then nodded. Okay. She eased the car forward, the convoy of bikers rolling with her until they reached a wide shoulder near a closed mechanic's shop. She parked, cutting the engine. The silence that followed made her ears ring. Ethan burst out of the car before Rachel could stop him, running straight toward the bikers with fearless excitement. That was awesome. You guys were like knights. Rachel's heart leaped. But then, wait. But the bikers didn't laugh at him, didn't scare him away. One of them, a tall man with a shaved head and tattoos running down his arms, crouched so he was closer to Ethan's height. His voice was surprisingly gentle. Knights, huh? Haven't been called that before. Ethan nodded fiercely. Yeah, you protected us. You didn't even get scared. The man chuckled, glancing at his brothers. Kid thinks we're brave. The others exchanged faint smiles, the kind that softened the edges of their rough exteriors. Rachel stepped out of the car, her arms crossed tightly against the night chill. She hovered, torn between pulling Ethan back and letting him soak in this strange moment of safety. The gray, bearded leader approached her. He didn't invade her space, just stood a few feet away, his presence steady but not threatening. You okay? He asked. Rachel nodded, though her voice wavered. Oh, I think so. Thank you, for everything. He inclined his head. Name's Hawk. Hawk, she repeated, testing the word. It suited him, sharp, watchful. He gestured toward the group. That's Tank, Grizzly, Doc, Snake. He listed off the nicknames with casual familiarity, each biker giving a nod when introduced. They sounded like characters out of some wild story, not men who had just saved her life. Rachel bit her lip. Why did you? She trailed off, unsure how to finish the question. Hawk seemed to understand anyway. Because no one should be left alone in a situation like that. Not a woman, not a kid, not anyone. His words were simple, but they landed heavy. Ethan tugged on Rachel's sleeve. Mom, can I stay with them a little, please? They're not scary, they're nice. Rachel looked down at him, then back at the bikers. Nice wasn't the word she would have chosen at first glance. But watching the way they interacted, with Ethan, with each other, she realized there was something deeper here. Tank, the tattooed man who had crouched for Ethan, leaned back on his heels. Got a boy about his age, he said almost offhand. Haven't seen him in a year, custody mess, miss him like hell. Rachel blinked, she hadn't expected that. Another biker, the one Hawk had called Doc, adjusted his leather vest. His hands trembled slightly, not from fear but from age. His beard was mostly white, and his eyes carried the weight of decades. Retired nurse, he explained when he caught Rachel staring. Spent 25 years in the ER. These guys dragged me into this Brotherhood after I patched one of them up. Guess they decided I was worth keeping. Rachel's mouth parted slightly. She hadn't imagined a man like him under the leather and patches. Grizzly, massive, broad-shouldered, with a growl in his voice, added quietly, I used to run with the wrong crowd. Did some time. These men pulled me out before I lost everything. Brotherhood means second chances. The others nodded in agreement, their silence carrying more weight than words. Rachel felt her defenses cracking piece by piece. These weren't monsters. They weren't criminals hunting for trouble. They were human. Flawed, scarred, but bound by something that looked suspiciously like loyalty, compassion, even love. Ethan was already won over. He peppered Tank with questions about his bike, about the roar of the engines, about whether he could ever ride one. Tank laughed, the sound rumbling from deep in his chest. Maybe one day, kid. You gotta grow a bit first. Rachel folded her arms tighter, but this time it wasn't from fear. It was from the swell of emotion rising in her chest. You didn't have to do any of this, she said softly to Hawk. Most people would have looked the other way. Hawk's eyes met hers, steady and unflinching. Most people forget the world only works if we look out for each other. Rachel's throat tightened. She hadn't expected philosophy from a man like him. She hadn't expected kindness either. For the first time all night, she let herself really breathe. Ethan clambered back to her side, grinning from ear to ear. Mom, can we stay with them a little longer, please? They're like superheroes, just real. Rachel smoothed his hair back, her lips curving in a faint, reluctant smile. Maybe just a little. And as she stood there under the glow of a lonely street lamp, surrounded by leather, chrome, and men society might have warned her to avoid, Rachel realized something that would stay with her forever. Heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they wear leather and ride in packs. The night still smelled faintly of gasoline and asphalt, but for the first time in hours, Rachel wasn't suffocating on fear. She leaned against her car. Ethan perched beside her, while the bikers formed a loose circle nearby. They weren't rushing off. They weren't treating this like a casual pit stop. They were waiting, watching, making sure. Rachel cleared her throat, her voice small. I live about 10 minutes from here. A Hawk, the leader, nodded. Then we'll see you there. The words hit Rachel harder than she expected. He said it with no hesitation, as though protecting her wasn't a question but a promise. You don't have to? She murmured. Yeah, Tank rumbled, rising from where he'd been crouched. We do. Ethan's grin stretched wide. We get a biker escort home. That's so cool. Rachel managed a nervous laugh, brushing his hair back. Guesso, buddy. They mounted their bikes again, the engines coughing to life one by one. The sound was thunder but no longer frightening. It was a lullaby of steel, a symphony of safety. Rachel drove carefully, the bikers reforming around her car just as before. But this time she wasn't clenching the wheel in terror. This time she felt cocooned. As the convoy rolled through the outskirts of town, people glanced up from diner windows, from porches, from the glow of gas station signs. Some frowned, some raised eyebrows, but Rachel realized with a small swell of pride, they weren't seeing the whole picture. Only she and Ethan knew the truth. This wasn't intimidation. It was protection. Ethan leaned forward in his seat, eyes sparkling as he counted headlights in the mirrors. Mom, it's like we're in a parade. Rachel smiled despite herself. Maybe a little. The road narrowed as they turned onto her neighborhood street, lined with dark houses and sleeping trees. She felt her chest tighten again. This was her world, quiet and ordinary, about to collide with something extraordinary. When she pulled into her driveway, the bikers fanned out, engines idling like guardians at a gate. Rachel killed the engine, her hands lingering on the wheel. Stay here a second, Ethan. She stepped out, heart hammering as she faced Hawk and the others. Their headlights threw long shadows across her lawn, making them look larger than life. You really didn't have to do all this, she said softly. I don't even know how to thank you. Hawk dismounted, his boots crunching against the pavement. He stopped a respectful distance away. Don't need thanks. Just needed to know you two got home safe. Rachel swallowed hard, emotion catching in her throat. But why? Why go out of your way for us? Hawk's gaze lingered on her for a moment before shifting to Ethan, who had climbed out of the car and was clutching his backpack like a shield. Hawk's voice softened. Because somewhere out there, someone I love might need the same. Rachel blinked, her eyes stinging. She wanted to ask more, but the weight of his words told her it was enough. Ethan piped up, his small voice bright in the heavy night. You guys are like family, huh? Tank chuckled. That's right, kid. Brotherhood. Grizzly rumbled. Doesn't matter where you come from. Once you're in for life. Doc adjusted his glasses, smiling faintly. It's not about what you ride, it's about who you ride for. Rachel felt her defenses finally crumble. These weren't strangers anymore, not really, not after what they'd shared. Ethan, fearless as ever, stepped closer to Hawk. Can we be part of your family too? Rachel's breath caught. Ethan. But Hawk crouched down to Ethan's level, his weathered face illuminated in the glow of the bike lights. You already are, little man. Tonight you are. Ethan's grin lit up the whole yard. Rachel pressed her hand to her mouth, overwhelmed. No one had ever stood by her like this, not since her husband died. She had carried everything alone, fear, bills, sleepless nights, and now in the most unexpected way she didn't feel alone anymore. One by one the bikers mounted their rides again, preparing to leave. Hawk lingered. Well, stick around the area tonight. Just in case they come sniffing around again. Rachel's eyes widened. You'd do that? Wouldn't sleep otherwise. She nodded, blinking back tears. I don't know what to say. You don't have to. Hawk replied. The engines roared to life again, echoing down the quiet street. The bikers pulled away slowly, disappearing into the dark like shadows returning to the night. Rachel stood frozen in her driveway, Ethan clutching her hand, both of them staring at the empty road long after the last headlight had faded. For the first time in years, Rachel didn't feel like prey in a dangerous world. She felt seen. Protected, maybe even part of something bigger.